Hello and welcome to Gettable, AFL.com.au's home of trade, draft, free agency and contract news. We are, of course, brought to you by Google Pixel. Great to have Google Pixel on board for season 2024. I'm Riley Beveridge. Plenty to get to in today's show. We'll be touching on Twomey's Phantom Form Guide in just a little bit. But before we did that, we wanted to bring back the wall of trades. Who is actually gettable? So many names, new names, big names, significant names, potentially on the trade table this year. And to kick us off, here's Cal with Harry Perryman.
Hey, how about the spin? Hello, Riley. Harry Perryman, one of the biggest ones. Let's kick off with him. He's got a 6-year offer in front of him from the Giants, but also long-term offers in front of him from Hawthorn and Port Adelaide. It's one of those three for him now. He's making that decision. The next few weeks, obviously, he's got the season's play out at the Giants, and all those clubs are in the finals race, clearly. So that'll be one that drags on a little bit, but he's got massive offers there to go and leave, and clearly that's been something that's been an option for him along this way. Don't discount the Hawks. A lot of talk around Port Adelaide. I wouldn't discount the Hawks at all as part of it. They've gone pretty aggressively at Harry Perryman, so he's an interesting one. Port Adelaide is into Harry Perryman. Speaking of Port Adelaide, Tom Cleary, he wants to move. He wants to get out and play some senior footy, which is fair enough. One game in the last 2 seasons. West Coast has a level of interest in him, potentially as a backup if Tom Barrass leaves, and we'll get to him pretty shortly. Caleb Daniel, I expect this one to be a late trade period option. I think something will happen later in the trade period. I don't think he's plan A or B for a lot of these clubs looking for some of these moves, but I think there'll be some interest in him later on.
Contracted until 2026 as
exactly,
well.
That's a factor. Well, he's contracted beyond that as well, and he's been such a massive player within this whole trade period discussion. Now, he wants to get back to Victoria. Port Adelaide has been aware of that, obviously, and they're into Harry Perryman and Isaac Cummings. So if they brought those 2 free agents in, it makes it a lot easier to let him go and then bring in some pretty strong trade and draft capital for him. We know Melbourne has been interested in him the longest. They've currently got pick 6. That's a pretty prized selection to get into the top end of the draft. So that's a really fascinating one now.
In terms of Melbourne's interest, is it not as straightforward as it once was in terms of getting there?
Well, they're first there and first to arrive, but you'd have to say that other clubs are going to be jumping in and seeing if they can get involved here. This is a guy who could be a back-to-back All-Australian. He'd probably go top 3 best and fairest again at Port Adelaide. He's in his absolute prime. So I'd expect other clubs to be jumping in and seeing if they can get involved in the Dan Houston chase, given he wants to get back to Victoria.
Jack Darling, contracted for 2025 at the Eagles.
Yeah, on a good contract as well, and always been on a good contract because of his star quality at the footy club. And I think he'd be open to looking if there's any other options out there for him, and other clubs are aware of that. He's got a year to go on his deal. At his age, whether someone comes for him and gives him a 2-year option to move him out of Western Australia, we wait to see. Bradley Scott has a 2-year offer in front of him that's been there for the best part of the season. I still think most likely to stay, but he has traditionally waited until September often to get his deals done. So a bit of a wait still, but I think most likely stay.
Mark Keane, I think he's keen to get to Collingwood, but whether or not he can is another question. He, of course, started his career at Collingwood, went back to Ireland, came back and joined Adelaide. Still got a year to run on his deal at the Crows, though. So the Crows would have to let him go if that was the case, and they might ultimately elect to hold him at Adelaide.
Well, they've done that previously with Himmelberg last year.
Of course, they certainly have. What about Nick Haynes? He's out of contract at the Giants, but wants to play on into 2025.
Yeah, and got interest out there. I see Carlton as the destination for him. I'd be surprised if it wasn't now.
Dan Rioli, got a few years left on his deal at the Tigers, but there's interest from Gold Coast.
More than interest, and more than interest from him in going as well. He wants to go there. Gold Coast want to have him there. They've got the picks to make it happen and to potentially pay a little bit overs for a player his age and experience as well. Would pick 12 and pick 20 get it done? I think that's a pretty good deal for Dan Rioli at this stage of his career. So for me, do the deal, move on and get the selections in. He wants to head up there. We know that. Jack Lukosius, well, he could be tied into this as well because he's got 2 years to go on his deal at the Suns. A fascinating one here because as soon as he was omitted last week on Thursday night, I'm sure phone calls were made very quickly to see what his status and eligibility was in terms of trade options. So Adelaide is circling. They've been circling for a little bit. I expect Victorian clubs to be in the mix for this one as well. I don't think it's necessarily return to South Australia or stay put at Gold Coast. I think some other clubs will throw their hands up and say, hey, what about us? Can you consider this as an option? He's got a couple of years left to go in his deal, a lucrative couple of years as well. So if he was going to be dragged out, it's probably going to have to be at that $1 million level. But also that can be smoothed out over a longer term deal potentially. It's going to take an early pick as well. This isn't a Jack Bowes type situation where they need him to get out.
What about Liam Ryan at West Coast? Because he signed a 2-year deal this year.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess it's around the discussion of how does West Coast generate more selections at the draft, and is there a club that's willing to pay a little bit overs for someone like him? Look, I think more likely stay at this point, but still a watch. Tim English, well, he's more than likely to stay. More likely to stay. He will be staying at the Western Bulldogs. 5-year offer there from him on the table, and I think he signs that in the very near future, and he will sign that in the very near future. West Coast had a dip, but he'll be staying at the footy club. Tom Barrass is such a fascinating one in this whole mix. We talked about him probably 2 or 3 months ago as the Western Bulldogs having him as a live option. They still are a live option for him, but Hawthorn has leapfrogged the Bulldogs and become the absolute destination for him. I think he'll want to go to the Hawthorn Footy Club. I think that's where he will see his footy being played on a 4-year offer plus maybe a 5th year for a trigger, a 4'5" deal coming from the Hawks. But I think that this one, from a West Coast point of view, as Hawthorn's season gets a little bit better and they go further potentially into the finals, it's probably not just going to be their first selection that gets this one done. So a little bit argy to come there, but I think that's where he'll want to play next year.
Well, they won't have a top 10 pick, it doesn't look like at the moment. What about Harry Edwards, his teammate in the back line at West Coast?
It could be tied into this. He has a 3-year offer on the table to remain at the Eagles. Very strong interest elsewhere as well, but I think more likely to stay if I was calling it right now.
Fremantle or West Coast for Liam Baker, Kel?
Well, that's been the question all along. It's very, very, very hard to see him remaining at the Richmond Footy Club. My understanding is they're aware of his intentions to seek a trade back to Western Australia. It's just now a matter of which club he chooses. It would take an enormous backflip for him to change and say I'm sticking at Punt Road now. So still both in it. Very different reasons for both clubs. West Coast, his childhood club. Fremantle would be able to get the deal done better. So does it also get tied into the brass discussion too around what selections they get in, what they have at their disposal?
What about Luke Parker? Because he's contracted for 2025, but he's played only 5 games for the Swans this year.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. Luke Parker has a year to run on his deal at Sydney as well. My understanding is the former Swans skipper is open to exploring a move to a rival club at the end of the year. So has only played 5 games, as you mentioned, been squeezed out of the midfield. Does he get squeezed out of the forward line when Tom Papley comes back in coming weeks? Is there a taker? I think he's gettable. It's just a matter of if there's a home there for him. What about Jack Carroll?
Yeah, out of contract at the Blues, still yet to be offered a new deal. Out of the team at the moment, but he'd likely come back into the side given the outs this weekend. We know there's interest from West Coast. I can see that one being a relatively easy one to get done.
Could it even be DFA?
It could be. It could certainly be. What about Elliot Himmelberg? He's a free agent at the end of the year. Had interest from the Giants last year, though.
Yeah, not the Giants this time around, but is on the table and looking for a home. So has an offer there to remain at the footy club, but we know if they're interested in Jack Lukosius, what does that mean for him? Lockie Gallant, there's a few guys who are going to be in that waiting zone.
Nick Bryant, contracted for 2025.
I think more likely stay at this point. Like, why would, if you're Essendon, you'd be willing to let go of him? Yeah. Especially when Sam Draper is... Oh, has the ball gone down at the back there? So especially if the Sam Draper free agency stakes get higher next year.
Let's move on. Joe Richards, he now does have a contract offer at Collingwood. So Collingwood in talks to try and keep him. There's significant interest from across the competition. I'm watching Port Adelaide there. I know they've got their hands full with the Harry Perryman deal, with the Isaac Cumming deal, Dan Houston, those type of guys. But I think Joe Richards is one on their radar. Tim Membry's another interesting one, a free agent this year. Clubs had a look at him last year, including Carlton, to potentially come in. Obviously, contract at the time, couldn't get a deal done. So
does Carlton come again?
I don't think so, but I think he will have interest from across the competition, and given the fact he's a free agent, I think he's more likely to leave this year. What about Dylan Shield? Still contracted at the Bombers for 2025?
Still contracted. Gettable, whether someone offers him some more midfield time, has been better the last sort of 6 weeks since getting back into the Bombers midfield mix, and whether they'd be willing to let him go too if they don't get any draft capital back for him. Not sure what's in their interest to do it too.
Yeah.
Alex Davies has a 2-year offer from the Suns on the table to remain at the footy club. Has some interest elsewhere as well, is sort of sussing that out at the moment. Look, he's a quality player and there's some opportunities there that he'd be looking for, but certainly has some midfielders ahead of him. Shea Bolton, there's no midfielders ahead of him at Richmond. He's a superstar, but he has a keenness to get back to Western Australia. Fremantle in the box seat there if he does get back. Freo want him. They have the selections to do it. They have 3 first-round picks. If one of them's used on Liam Baker and the other 2 are used on Shea Bolton, I reckon that's a pretty good deal for the Tigers. Why would you not do it? You have to do it. This is like someone coming to you and saying, you're going to sell your house next year anyway. We're going to give you $3 million overs. Do it now. I think you just do it.
Sold.
While you've got a taker.
What about James Peatling at the Giants?
I don't think the money's quite as Shea Bolton level, but the interest is very, very strong in James Peatling because he has a contract offer now in front of him that's been upped from the Giants. It's now 2 years to remain at the Giants, but also interest from a number of clubs, St Kilda, Melbourne, West Coast among them, and even more in the Peatling party. So he had 10 Coaches Association votes on the weekend, best on ground. He's going under the radar as a much sought after player. Jack Macrae, a little bit different in his VFL form, been very, very strong. But I think that's one that we might see later in the trade period get some traction.
37 disposals and 17 clearances on the weekend for Jack Macrae. What about Ben Hobbs? In and out of the Bombers side this year, but he's contracted for 2025.
Yeah, he's contracted for next year. I think there's still going to be a watch for him in the trade period. He's a midfielder. Is he going to be a midfielder at Essendon? That's got to be the question. And if he isn't, does Essendon see that it's an opportunity to get some more draft selections into their mix?
What about Seb Ross? Because he is also a midfielder, but he's had a contract at the Saints.
Yeah, he's an unrestricted free agent. I think he's very gettable if someone comes and wants some experience for him. Rory Lobb,
we've said it all year. If he plays, he stays. He is playing, so I think he's staying. And especially with Tom Barrass leaning towards Hawthorn now, I think his future's probably at the Western Bulldogs. Still contracted for 2026. No reason for them to give him up either.
No, there isn't. The only watch I'd have for him is, if they make a final, he doesn't play in the final. Final selections can change trade decisions very quickly for clubs and also players. I don't think he's going to be on the mix though for that.
Jacob Constanti was a top 20 pick a few years ago.
He doesn't have a home at the moment for next year, out of contract at the Swans still. So it's one to keep an eye on there. Isaac Cumming has a 4-year offer in front of him. Yeah,
he does. So that long-term offer from the Giants. I think the decision for Isaac Cumming now is either stay at the Giants or go to South Australia. So Adelaide and Port Adelaide both in that mix. Fremantle and Melbourne also had a look. I don't think their levels of interest is as high as Adelaide and Port Adelaide. So I think his decision now is firmly stay at the Giants or go to South Australia.
How dependent is that on the decision of Harry Perriman over there?
Well,
and do the Giants up the offer if Harry Perriman gives them an indication he's going?
Yeah, I mean, I get the sense Harry Perriman's leaning towards going at the moment. Whether or not that's Hawthorn or Port Adelaide is another question, but I get the sense he's leaning towards going. So I think if he does ultimately go, why wouldn't you up the offer for Isaac Cumming and make a stronger play for him to stay at the football club? Obviously, both can play across half-back, have done jobs through the midfield and on the wing in the past. So I think you can't afford to lose both if you're the Giants. So I think it makes sense.
It might be a package deal for Port Adelaide too, though.
It certainly could be. Because they're both unrestricted free agents, the Giants might have no say in it whatsoever. Matt Owies, still without a contract at Carlton. He's kicked 29 goals this year, career best season, still without a contract offer from the Blues.
I'm going to do a Riley Beveridge here. He's hit more goals than Bobby Hill, Cam Zurhaar, and as many as Dylan Moore and Josh Shelley. What am I missing here? You watch Carlton close tonight. I still watch them pretty closely. What am I missing?
I don't know. Is it more than goals with Matt Owies?
Well, goals are pretty good.
Goals are pretty good. Is it the forward pressure? Is it trying to add a bit more speed through the forward line in attack for the Blues? I wonder.
So Razio Fantasia contracted for next year, but he doesn't have a contract.
No.
Yeah. Jack Graham?
Yeah, has a 4-year deal on the table from West Coast, as we reported last week, to move as an unrestricted free agent. But Richmond has also made an offer for him to stay. I think the Tigers genuinely want to keep him. I think this one's right up in the air at the moment in terms of a 50-50 being whether or not he stays at the Tigers or goes to the Eagles.
Okay, interesting.
Jake Stringer?
Yeah, Stringer, well, it's a wait and see. It's nearly the end of the Bombers season. I think that 2 more weeks, we'll probably just wait and see a decision on that. Still no offer there from the Bombers. Kicked more goals than Matt Owies, though.
He certainly has. Jack Martin at Carlton. We know he's had interest from Fremantle in the past. Fremantle have retained that interest going into this year. Out of contract, another hamstring injury on the weekend. So, yeah, I don't see his future being at the Blues. Whether or not it's Fremantle or elsewhere, we'll wait and see. Lewis Young, contracted until 2026 at Carlton, but they're after key defenders.
Yeah, we spoke about Nick Haynes. Lewis Young's been overlooked in selection a number of times, so I think he's on the trade table. I think he's absolutely gettable. I'm interested to see if there's a take or not and what that means for their list shuffle as well, like in terms of list spots, what that means for the Haynes acquisition if Lewis Young remains at the footy club.
What about Josh Battle? We know Hawthorn's massively interested.
I just don't know why would he have not signed at St Kilda if he was staying at St Kilda at this point. I think we'll get a very, very clear indication if Hawthorn makes the finals straight after round 24 if he's going to Hawthorn or not, because if he isn't, then he'd sign straight away. But if he is, then he'd wait until the Hawthorn final series is done, I'd imagine, to let them know.
Bailey Smith, Geelong or Hawthorn, Cal?
Well, we're in Docklands. How to get to the Geelong Highway? I think it's turned right out there. I think that's the way Baz is going.
The Cats for Baz. Well, on the Google Pixel with the Magic Eraser, you can make distractions disappear. So, Cal, I want to know which player is most likely to be magically erased from this wall next?
Oh, I would say Bailey Scott is a good chance. I'm just looking around.
Tim English?
Oh, Tim English, definitely. Just keeping him out of it. Harry Edwards would be another opportunity, I think, to tuck him away, particularly if the Barrass stuff continues to garner more interest from the Hawks.
Great work from you. Plenty more still to come on Gettable. Stick around. Welcome back to Gettable. That was the Wall of Trades. Who is actually Gettable? Always fun to bring the Wall of Trades back, Cal.
Yes, all in all, you're just another trade in the wall.
Good one. Nice. All right, let's get to right here, right now.
Toby Pink Floyd.
Just start off.
Right here, right now. Mac Andrew, right here, right now, is one of the hottest properties in footy. Out of contract in 2025. The Suns and his management have started discussions on an extension there. I'd expect that one to be, in the eyes of the Suns, hopefully a 4-year deal, lock him through to free agency. Interesting one, though, in that other clubs have followed this one pretty closely. I understand Hawthorn has kept a bit of a trade watch on him for 2025.
Right.
But obviously the Suns are a bit keen to lock him away, and yeah, he's a star. So right here, right now, we spoke about clubs backing up the truck a few weeks ago for him.
Nah, it's not coming.
So I think they will be doing that, but I reckon the Suns will be backing up the truck as well.
Yes, he's a gun. What a game on the weekend from him. All right here, right now, North Melbourne is hunting for experience, but Jack Viney won't be at the Kangaroos in 2025. So it's my understanding that this was quashed about 8 weeks ago, around the same time as the Ollie Wines stuff was quashed. Obviously, they're close mates. Still has a year to run on his contract. He's since started talks around extending that deal at Melbourne in 2025. He's Melbourne through and through. Jack Viney, I can't see him leaving the football club. I think the question might have been asked by the Kangaroos at one point, but I think that was quashed some time ago now.
Yeah, they've got a lot happening, the Melbourne Footy Club. Obviously, Alex Milburn wants to head back to South Australia for family reasons. That'll happen. I have the Crows in the box seat to make that one happen, and for him to be an Adelaide player next year, despite being contracted for the next couple of years. Family reasons that are pretty significant for him to get back. So he will get back to South Australia. And obviously, there's the Christian Petrarca situation, which you'd have to expect other clubs getting busy and seeing what they can put towards Melbourne and seeing if they can get in the race for Petrarca. I still think he stays and plays at Melbourne in 2025, but it's opened the door.
Yeah, it's going to be a very interesting summer for the D's.
All right, just on Petrarca, right here, right now, long-term contracts are proving a win for the clubs now. So there's so much talk about long-term contracts. Why do clubs give them? What's in it for them? Well, look right now at the trade market. Dan Houston wants to get back to Victoria. Tom Barrass wants to play for Hawthorn. Petrarca is in the mix for other clubs as well. Jack Lukosius has 2 years to go on his deal, and there's more contracted players who we just spoke about. Shea Bolton wants to get to Western Australia. Daniel Rioli wants to go to Queensland. Well, all those players are contracted, and lots of them for longer term as well. So right here, right now, we're seeing the value of it for clubs in that they don't get unders in the trade evolution of it all, because they will be able to get the best leverage out of the deal if those players do go. So that's part of the value of a long-term contract. They have control of the player.
Yeah. No, I like that. Good from you, Kel. Right here, right now, Carlton's need for a key defender is accelerating. So clearly the Blues are in the market for key defenders. We mentioned Nick Haynes during the Wall of Trades. I think he's one of their primary targets now. But that's because I think that obviously the key defender market is thinning, and it's been thinning throughout the year. So we think Jack Henry is going to get taken off that, and there's not many more beyond that will come cheap for the Blues. So they don't have much trade capital. They wanted free agents. They targeted Will Hayward earlier this year. So I think Nick Haynes makes perfect sense for the Blues, who I also think will be in the market for speed at the end of this season. So they were shown up in terms of their leg speed by Hawthorn on the weekend. So they clearly need speed all around the ground.
Right here, right now, I just want to check how you slept last night.
Well, again.
That's good. A carryover gag from last year.
Not well, actually.
Riley did actually say last year that he didn't sleep the night before Form Guides come out. Well, here's the August one. My top 30 is out for this year and for the August edition. Here's the top 10. We have Levi Ashcroft, number 1. Jagger Smith's moved up. Harvey Langford to number 3 as well. Finn O'Sullivan 4. Josh Smiley 5. Murphy Reid 6. Sid Draper 7. Harry Armstrong,
he's
the big mover. Into number 8. Sam Lawler, number 9. Number 10, Luke Traynor. It's a pretty good 10. Let's just quickly have a look at a couple of these guys. Harvey Langford moves up to number 3 spot because of some of his form and just consistency. He'll play for Richmond's VFL side this weekend. Jagger moves up a few spots to 2 after his VFL form for Richmond's VFL side was so good. He dominated for 3 weeks, showed his class and composure. Here's a couple of goals from Finn O'Sullivan as well, playing in the weekend's game for Richmond's VFL. So Richmond is getting a really good opportunity to see some of these players. I'm not sure how wrapped some of the other clubs are about this, that they're basically doing more window shopping than 50 Cent about their potential options for the #1 pick. They actually checked to see if they could have Murphy Reid play for them this weekend as well, but he's playing for the Sandringham Dragons. I'd imagine the question's been put out to Josh Smiley as well. There is some mitigating circumstances to it because they are an injury-hit team, like Carlton are in the VFL as well, so we're seeing more players play for them. Speaking of Carlton VFL, well, Toby Travaglia is in the next group of players in my fandom form guide. We see his name pop up right now, if we can. There he is at number 13. So he played for Carlton's VFL side over the weekend. He'll play again this week, I believe. So that's a good experience for him. Bo Allen, number 11. Leo Lombard hasn't done much wrong, to be honest. It's probably a bit unlucky to be at 12, but I really like the 10 group ahead of them there. Taj Houghton, 14, well, he's coming back from that ACL, as we know. Isaac Coco in the 15, alongside Joe Berry, the other small forward at 17. Xavier Lindsay, again, could easily be up a little bit high. Cooper Hines has shifted up a spot. Jack Whitlock and Alex Taru, the Flying Viking, back there at number 20. He is as powerful and raw and exciting as we'll see. We'll see some form here from Toby Travaglia, though, from the weekend's game. He's a star and he moves around the ground really well. He'll be able to start his career as a halfback, maybe a midfielder. He can run all day. He's got good leadership. His aerobic base is incredible. So he is a very talented player and he could easily be a top 10 for some clubs. And also Cooper Hines as well is a player that I just want to put a little bit of a spotlight on because I think some of the form we've seen from him this year has been incredible and he's got so much power. There's a bit of Jake Stringer in him as a forward. Sometimes he goes into the midfield and busts away and bursts out of packs. Just as good as Harvey Langford's been for Dandenong, so has Cooper Hines. In this game, he kicked 3 goals from 28 disposals a couple of weeks ago, so he's got some real power and explosiveness.
And then we're about to see the remainder of the top 30. Only one change to the top 30. So you've brought in Jesse Tolley, who comes in there at number 29. But 29 of the 30 stay the same from last month. Yeah,
and lots of talls in this group. Look at Jobe Shanahan, Alex Dodson, Jonty Fall shifted up a couple of spots. Matt Whitlock and Tom Sims as well. Tolley, well, he's tough, competitive, confident. He breaks in on pure form and consistency. So he did well for Vic Metro at the Carnival. Watched him play a couple of times since then as well, and he's pretty versatile and was actually a chance to play in Carlton's VFL side this week with their injury hit season as well. So he plays 4th game back though for the Northern Knights here. Here's Jonty Fall a couple of weeks ago as well, key forward for the Greater Western Victoria Rebels. He came back after a back injury mid-season and is among that top group of key forwards there. So there's a lot to like about him, and I think he's someone who could push up a little bit higher as the season goes on. Jobe Shanahan's VFL form has been very good as well.
It's a strong list this year, Cal.
It is. Right here, right now, clubs are keen to get into the top end of the draft because of how strong it is, and there's some pretty unlucky players not to be in that top 30.
Certainly is. All right, let's get to Askable. Askable is where you ask the questions, we answer them. It is, of course, brought to you by Google Pixel. Get in touch with us. Get your Google Pixel out. Get onto Instagram. Get in touch with us at Gettable to ask the questions. We'll start with Brighton, who wants to know how is River Stevens tracking as a father-son. I like him, really tough.
Yeah, he is. He's been invited to the state draft combine. So he's the son of Anthony Stevens, of course, former player at the Roos. I think he's projecting to be a later pick / rookie option for North Melbourne, but I expect him to be at the club next year. Small forward, running capacity, tough, good skills on his left side. He's done a lot right this year.
And the Kangas, of course, will have the opportunity to pre-list him as a father-son rookie if he does look like he slips through the draft, as we spoke about last week. Adam wants to know, who should Essendon look at with their first pick before an Isaac Kako bid comes through?
Well, at the moment they have pick 9. It could be pick 8 by the end of the season. It's not going to shift too much from that spot, I wouldn't have thought. Either way, they're going to be in the danger zone of a bid coming in for Kako, or at least a threat bid. So I think they should be paying overs to get up a few spots just to make absolute certain of the fact they will be able to get in with their latest selections. Harry Armstrong is the one that I think they should look at really closely, and his form as a 195 centimetre tall forward for the Sandringham Dragons, for Vic Metro, for Haileybury College has been terrific. If Essendon could get Caddy, Armstrong and Kako over 2 years, that sets the foundation of an exciting forward line.
It's some forward line, isn't it?
Question for you from Marie. How many rucks do you actually see moving this year?
Well, not many, as we spoke about last week. The ruck market is thinning already. The merry-go-round is getting thinner, and that's because a couple of the guys, like we mentioned last week in terms of Oscar Steen and Liam Reid, have been taken off the board. So I think you're going to have to look at contracted players now, whether or not a Ned Reeves at Hawthorn, who's not getting a game behind Lloyd Meek, Mark Pitnet, once Tom de Koning gets back, if the Blues would part with him with a couple of years remaining on his deal, or whether or not someone like a Lewis Young and whether or not clubs think of him as a potential backup ruckman in the future. We mentioned Carlton's potential willingness to explore a trade for him. What about Ivan Soldo? Because you've mentioned his name a couple of weeks ago. Obviously had that trade from Richmond to Port Adelaide last year. Not in the team at the moment though.
Yeah, I mean, the clubs have spoken about it, so we'll wait and see. I think rucks are the one position where, if you speak out contracts before, I think rucks are a position where contracts mean absolutely nothing. It's generally the way. So, yeah, clubs have been speaking about that one.
All right, Thomas wants to know, will Port Adelaide demand Cozzy Pickett for Dan Houston?
I don't think so. I mean, there's also...
They can ask.
They can ask, but I think there's also salary cap implications for this move as well. Like, if they bring in Perryman coming, I don't think you'd then be able to add in Cozzy Pickett, who's a high-end player. So I don't think that's the case. And as we spoke about before, it'd be interesting to see if any other clubs jump in now for Houston.
Yeah, okay. Bobby wants to know, if Rioli, Baker, Bolton all leave, name the draftees the Tigers should target.
So if Baker and Bolton go to Fremantle and Rioli go to Gold Coast, the Tigers would end up with picks 1, 8, 12, 13, 17 and 20 on the current ladder, essentially.
What's that, 5 to 20s?
It's 6.
Okay. Can't count.
So here's the players they could conceivably end up with in that range. Just looking at the
form guide.
The form guide as a bit of a guide. So Jagger Smith, Sam Lawler, Toby Travaglia, Xavier Lindsay, Jack Whitlock, Alex Taru.
It's quite a list, isn't it?
It's pretty tempting.
Yeah.
When's Tasmania come in?
That kickstarts a rebuild, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Certainly does. Aaron wants to know, could the Pies offload a McGuinness or a McRae at the end of the year?
Well, no offer for Reef McInnes yet, and McRae would be gettable for sure if there's a market for him. And both players at the end of their 4th years, of course, out of that 2020 draft. McRae is signed till the end of next year, so it does have that extra level of security for him. Reef's an interesting one. He's been in and out a little bit this year.
I like him.
But has shown a bit as a forward. We know McRae's ball winning it at VFL level in particular. So, yeah, I think they're both watchers and both gettable.
Yeah, agreed. Lockie wants to know, what's the latest with the Crows contracts?
Still waiting on a few of the Crows deals. Still have a number out of contract. Lockie Gallant had North Melbourne chasing him last year, but without a deal for next year. Kicked 8 on the weekend, so in pretty good form. Hugh Bond has also shown some promising signs, so whether we see him targeted by anyone else, I think some of his lockdown jobs have been pretty good. He's played on some good small forwards, Stengel, Waitman, Ginnivan among that top group in his early part of his career this year. Then McHenry's without a contract as well. Sam Berry has an offer in front of him, as we spoke about as well, as does Elliot Himmelberg, who's assessing his options. Tex Walker, we know the decision will come at the end of their season.
And lastly, Gavin wants to know, what's the view on the 2025 draft crop after the under-17s?
Well, a lot of the talk was on how strong the northern markets looked in comparison to the Victorian teams. So obviously New South Wales beat Vic Country, Queensland beat Vic Metro. So I think you get a good guide on where the talent pool is going to come from out of that, and it probably comes into contention as well where the AFL is changing its rules for next year. They didn't do that, not knowing how the talent pool was looking. Cooper Duff Tyler, the Duff man that we mentioned last week on the show, he did have a good day as well with 2 goals for Vic Metro. Dan Annabelle, Bo Adentul, and also Kobe Coulson, all's very good for Queensland as well for next year. So we're going to see more players slip out of the academies into the open pool because the new rules will mean that the clubs just won't be able to match them all. Yeah, it's going to be tough for those Northern clubs to match bids in the future. Cal, great stuff from you. We are back early next week on Monday, so looking forward to Monday's show. Tune in to us then. It's going to be a massive episode on Monday. We've got plenty planned. A big thank you to you, Cal. Big thanks for watching. Big thanks to Google Pixel for their support throughout the year. See you next week.
Want to get all the latest footy news in one hit? From injuries to breaking news, the latest from the coaches, the Footy Feed team has you covered. Watch it now on afl.com.au and the AFL Live app, or wherever you get your podcasts.